My girlfriend suddenly said, "My friends think you're holding me back. I can't do this anymore, we're done." I just smirked and told her, "Fine. Go join them then." The way everyone stared at her the moment I walked out told me everything I needed to know about her and them. The words hit me like a physical blow. My friends think you limit me, so we're done. I just stared at Olivia for 3 seconds, maybe 4, before a quiet, seething rage made me respond, "Cool, then go join them." The silence that followed was immediate, thick enough to cut. It hung heavy, almost suffocating, because her entire friend group was right there, sitting at the table, watching us like a live audience at some twisted reality show finale. Their faces, just moments before smug and confident, twisted into genuine, undeniable shock. That told me everything I needed to know about who had really been orchestrating our relationship for the last 6 months. As a cybersecurity analyst, I'm wired to see patterns, spot threats, and solve problems with logic, not emotion. Ironically, that very trait often led people to label me emotionally unavailable, people who never really bothered to look past the surface. I'm the guy who shows up on time, remembers important dates, asks how your day went, and actually listens to the answer. But apparently, none of that matters when you're being measured against some rigid podcast checklist of what a boyfriend should be. Olivia and I met 2 years ago in a coffee shop. She was engrossed in a book about minimalism, and I was deep into a security audit. We just started talking, realizing we shared this belief that people overcomplicate life when simple solutions often work best. She was a graphic design student with this incredible calm energy. We'd spend hours walking around the city, discussing everything from architecture to what dogs dream about. It felt real, authentic, without the need for Instagram stories or constant external validation. Our first year together was genuinely good. We communicated like adults, had our own lives, but always made time for each other. When problems arose, we talked them through instead of letting them fester. She moved into my apartment after about 8 months, and it was seamless. We split chores based on our strengths, cooked together on weekends, and had this running joke about how boring we must seem because we preferred documentaries to clubbing. Then she got this job as a production assistant for the Living Your Truth podcast. And everything started to subtly shift. At first, it was just small things, new phrases creeping into her vocabulary. Words like toxic patterns, emotional labor, and that doesn't serve me, used in contexts that frankly didn't fit our actual life. I still remember the first time she came home and announced we needed to have a conversation about boundaries. I asked, "Okay, what's wrong?" And she pulled out her phone, reading from notes she'd taken during a podcast recording about relationship red flags. I listened, really listened, to the whole thing. Then I asked her which of those red flags she'd actually seen in our relationship. She got quiet, mumbled something about just being proactive. Looking back, that should have been my first real warning, but I just figured she was excited about her new job, applying what she was learning. The podcast itself was run by a woman named Samantha, who had built an entire brand around helping women identify manipulation and stand up for themselves. Sounds great on paper, right? Until you realize the show's formula was basically taking normal relationship friction and repackaging it as abuse. Every episode was the same, anonymous submissions, analyzed through the most uncharitable lens possible, then celebrating women who left their partners over things like, "He wanted to discuss the budget before buying a new car," or "He asked me to text when I got home safe." Their audience ate it up, feeling empowered to see red flags everywhere. The comments section was always full of people sharing stories about finally leaving boyfriends who committed crimes like being tired after work or having opinions about dinner plans. Olivia started inviting me to the live recordings, twice a month at this downtown venue. I went because I wanted to support her, even though the whole vibe made me incredibly uncomfortable. The first time I showed up, the entire production team stared at me like I was a specimen. During a break, Samantha introduced herself and immediately asked what I did. I told her cybersecurity. She smiled this knowing smile and said, "Oh, so you're analytical." That must be challenging for Olivia. Like being good at my job was some kind of personality defect. I just nodded, "We make it work." She patted my arm and walked away. Olivia later told me Samantha thought I seemed guarded, which was apparently code for emotionally unavailable. After that recording, walking to the car, Olivia said, "They think you're emotionally unavailable." I asked her what she thought, and she hesitated, just long enough for me to know she'd been discussing me with them. She eventually said no, she didn't think that, but she could see where they were coming from because I didn't always express my feelings in obvious ways. I reminded her I'd literally spent 4 hours the previous week helping her redesign her portfolio website and listening to her stress about a difficult client. But apparently, that didn't count as emotional availability in their framework. The dynamic changed fast after that. Suddenly, every normal interaction was filtered through this lens of whether it was a red flag or healthy behavior. I'd suggest we stay in on Friday because I had an early morning security patch to deploy, and she'd accuse me of isolating her from her social circle. I'd ask if she wanted to talk about why she seemed stressed, and she'd say I was demanding emotional labor. I'd plan a weekend trip to the Smoky Mountains because we both loved hiking, and she'd question whether I was trying to control our schedule. Nothing I did was ever just a normal thing a person does anymore. It was all evidence of some deeper, sinister pattern that needed to be examined and discussed with her friends, who had never even had a real conversation with me. The truly bizarre part was watching her adopt their speaking style. She'd come home and use these perfectly constructed therapy speak sentences that sounded nothing like her. "I'm noticing a pattern where you center your own comfort over my needs," she'd say when I asked if we could turn down the TV during a work call. I'd just stare, wondering where my girlfriend went and who this person reading from a script was. I tried talking to her, multiple times. Asked if she felt like she was losing herself a bit in this new job. She'd immediately get defensive, saying I was threatened by her growth, as if she'd been an incomplete person before, only now becoming her true self by analyzing our relationship to death with people who'd decided I was the villain before ever meeting me. The production team started showing up more in our lives too. We'd be at an Astoria bar, and suddenly Samantha and 2 other women from the podcast would appear. Olivia would light up, and I'd become invisible. They'd talk about recent episodes, share stories about their own relationships. Every single story ended with them realizing their boyfriend was manipulative and leaving. They'd congratulate each other, as if escaping was the only acceptable outcome for any relationship requiring actual effort. I'd sit there, nursing a beer, watching Olivia laugh at their jokes and nod along to their theories. I could feel her slipping away, into a world where I'd already been convicted of crimes I didn't commit. One night, about 4 months into her job, we were supposed to have dinner, just us, something we hadn't done in weeks because she was always working late or meeting the production team. I'd made reservations at her favorite Italian place and gotten home early to change. When she walked in, she immediately said, "Samantha and the team want to grab drinks tonight. Is it cool if we reschedule?" I just looked at her. We'd had these plans for 2 weeks. She got this look, like I was asking her to choose. "See," she said, "this is what they mean. You make me feel guilty for having a social life." I told her wanting one dinner together after barely seeing each other wasn't making her feel guilty, it was basic relationship maintenance. But she was already texting them she'd be there. I ended up at the restaurant alone, sitting at a table set for 2, eating in silence while the waiter tried very hard to pretend this wasn't profoundly depressing. That was the night I realized I wasn't dating Olivia anymore. I was dating the podcast version of who they thought she should be. And that person had already decided I was the problem. I still didn't know the worst part, though. Didn't know that our private conversations, my text messages, even my work schedule, had become content for their group chat. Raw material they were analyzing like I was some kind of case study in manipulation tactics. I didn't know every word I said to her in private was being screenshot and dissected by people who'd never spoken to me beyond surface-level small talk. And I definitely didn't know they were cataloging everything into categories like isolation attempts, guilt-tripping, and financial control. All I knew was the woman I loved was disappearing, being replaced by someone who saw me as a problem to be solved, rather than a partner to build a life with. And I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The moment I discovered they'd been reading my private messages was so surreal my brain almost refused to process it. Like when you see something so wrong your mind needs a few seconds to catch up to what your eyes are showing you. It was a Tuesday night. Olivia was in the shower. Her iPad was on the coffee table, buzzing with notifications. Normally, I wouldn't even glance at her devices. Privacy was something I actually believed in, unlike apparently everyone else in her life. But the notification preview was right there on the lock screen. Samantha, clip 3 is perfect classic isolation phrase. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what clip 3 was. A voice memo I'd sent Olivia 4 days earlier about booking a cabin in the Smoky Mountains for our anniversary. I picked up the iPad. It unlocked. What I saw next made me physically sick. I was looking at a group chat called Olivia Support Squad, with 12 members, including the entire podcast production team. I started scrolling, my hands shaking. Months of our private conversations were just there. Screenshot after screenshot of texts I'd sent her, photos of us with annotations pointing out my body language, voice memos I'd recorded when I was too tired to type. All of it dissected, analyzed, like I was a criminal suspect. There was the text where I'd said I was working late on a security breach and couldn't make dinner. Under it, Samantha had written, "Notice the vague terminology, classic avoidance of real intimacy." There was the message where I'd suggested we save money for a down payment instead of an expensive vacation, labeled financial manipulation, controlling the narrative around their future. There was even a photo from a Saturday morning where I was making breakfast, and apparently my expression was dismissive because I wasn't smiling enough. Never mind, I'd just woken up and hadn't had coffee. Every single normal interaction for months had been fed into this machine that converted regular relationship moments into evidence of toxicity. What made it worse was seeing Olivia's responses in the chat. She'd add context, but always in a way that made me look worse. He says he's tired, but I think he just doesn't want to engage emotionally. Or, he planned this whole trip without asking what I wanted, when I'd literally sent her 3 different cabin options and asked her to pick her favorite. The chat went back 6 months, almost to the exact week she'd started working at the podcast. I could track the change in her language in real time, going from defending me to questioning everything I did, to eventually just accepting their interpretation of my actions without pushback. There was this one exchange where I texted her during a work meeting, saying I missed her and wished I was home, just a sweet, normal message. Someone named Chloe had responded in the group chat, love bombing after a period of emotional distance, textbook cycle. And Olivia had replied with a thinking emoji instead of telling them they were insane. I sat there on the couch, reading through months of my life being turned into content for people who seemed to genuinely believe any man not performing happiness every second was secretly abusive. The worst part was, I couldn't even be angry, because anger would just prove their point. I heard the shower turn off. Maybe 2 minutes before Olivia came out. I took screenshots of everything, sent them to myself, deleted the sent messages from her iPad, and put it back exactly where it was. My hands were still shaking when she walked into the living room in her bathrobe, asking what I wanted for dinner. I just looked at her and said we needed to talk about privacy and boundaries. I watched her face instantly shift into that defensive expression before I'd even explained what I meant. She immediately asked if I'd gone through her phone. I told her no. I saw a notification on her iPad that concerned me. She grabbed it off the table like I'd threatened to smash it. I asked her directly if she'd been sharing our private conversations with the podcast team. She got very still. That stillness told me everything before she even opened her mouth. "They're helping me see patterns I couldn't see on my own," she said. I asked her what patterns, exactly. She started listing things in this rehearsed way that sounded nothing like her actual voice. I had a habit of making plans without consulting her. I used work as an excuse to avoid emotional conversations. I made her feel guilty for spending time with friends. Every single point was straight out of a podcast episode I'd heard them record. I asked for specific examples, with dates and contexts. She couldn't give me any. Just kept talking in broad generalizations about patterns and red flags and things that felt manipulative, even if she couldn't explain why. I told her sharing my text messages and voice memos with a dozen strangers without my consent was an actual violation of privacy. Not just a feeling, but a real thing that actually happened. And she said, "Samantha says your wording is manipulative." Like that was a response. I just stared at her. In that moment, I realized I wasn't talking to my girlfriend anymore. I was talking to a committee. Every word I said would be reported back, analyzed, and used as evidence in a case I didn't even know I was on trial for. She kept going, told me the group chat was a safe space for her to process her feelings that I couldn't understand because I'd never been gaslit the way she had in past relationships. I wanted to point out I'd been there for every story about her difficult ex, and had never once shared those private moments with anyone. But there was no point. She'd already decided my expectation of basic privacy was just another form of control, another red flag, another reason they were right about me all along. I asked her if she understood that everything I told her in confidence, every vulnerable moment, every private thought, was now entertainment for people who didn't know me and had already decided I was the villain. "They're not strangers," she said, "they're my support system." I told her a support system doesn't require screenshots and forensic analysis of text messages. It requires actual conversation and trust. She looked at me with this expression that was pure podcast rhetoric and said, "You're just upset because you can't control the narrative anymore." The conversation went in circles for another 20 minutes. Her speaking in borrowed phrases, me trying to explain that privacy isn't control. Until finally, I just stopped talking. Nothing I said would matter. She'd been marinating in this environment where every man was suspect and every boundary was oppression for so long that she couldn't see how completely insane it was to treat your partner like a research subject. I went to bed that night in the spare room because I couldn't stand to be near her. I lay there in the dark, thinking about how every word I'd said that evening was probably already typed up in that group chat, with commentary about my defensive behavior and inability to take accountability. I thought about all the times I'd comforted her when she was stressed. All the little things I did to make her life easier. All the ways I'd shown up, consistently and reliably. None of it mattered because it wasn't performative enough for an audience that needed me to be a villain. The next morning, she was gone before I woke up. Around noon, I got a text, "We need to talk." 7 p.m. Astoria Bar. I knew exactly what was coming. You don't schedule a breakup conversation in a public place unless you want witnesses, or you're afraid of the other person's reaction. I texted back sure, and spent the rest of the day working from home, finishing a security audit. I made sure my professional life was solid because I knew my personal life was about to implode, and I wanted at least one area of stability. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt, not really. I was just exhausted from months of being treated like a suspect in my own relationship. Honestly, a part of me felt relieved it was finally going to be over. I showed up at Astoria Bar at 6:55. Being late would obviously be another red flag. Olivia was already there at a corner table with 3 of her podcast friends sitting at the bar, pretending they weren't watching. I realized this wasn't going to be a conversation at all. It was a performance, with an audience ready to validate whatever she said. I sat down across from Olivia. Immediately, I noticed she had note cards in front of her. Actual physical note cards, like she was about to give a presentation. That's when I really knew this wasn't a real conversation. She started talking before I even ordered a drink, using that same therapy speak voice that had replaced her actual personality. She told me she'd been doing a lot of reflection and realized our relationship had become unhealthy for her growth. I just listened, watching her glance down at the cards every few seconds. When she paused, I asked her for one specific example of something unhealthy I'd done. Just one concrete moment, with context. She fumbled through her cards, looking increasingly frustrated. She said things felt wrong and the dynamic was off, and she'd been walking on eggshells. But when I asked when specifically she'd felt that way, she couldn't answer. Just kept circling back to feelings and patterns and things Samantha had helped her identify. I could see her friends at the bar leaning in, trying to hear. I realized they'd probably helped write those note cards, probably spent hours crafting this script for her to follow. She eventually just said what she'd probably planned to say from the start, the line about her friends thinking I limited her. A weird calm washed over me. Finally, we were getting to the truth. I asked her if her friends' opinions mattered more than her own experience of our relationship. She said they could see things she couldn't. And that's when I knew there was no relationship left to save. Cool, then go join them, I told her. The look on her face was pure shock. Like she'd expected me to beg, or argue, or give her the dramatic scene they'd probably predicted. Her friends at the bar went completely silent. I could feel their stares. Olivia just sat there, opening and closing her mouth, trying to figure out what to say now that her script hadn't accounted for me just agreeing. I pulled out my wallet, put down $40 for the drinks neither of us had touched, and told her I hoped she found whatever it was she was looking for. Then I stood up, walked past her friends without even glancing, and left the bar feeling lighter than I had in months. The performance was finally over. The next few days were mechanical, efficient. That's how I handle problems: make a plan, execute it. I packed up all her stuff from my apartment, every piece of clothing, every book, every random item she'd left scattered over 2 years. Boxed it all neatly, left it in the building lobby with a text telling her when she could pick it up. I blocked her number, blocked her on every social media platform, blocked her friends, blocked anyone associated with that podcast. And I did it all without anger or drama, because I was just done giving them content to analyze. She tried calling from different numbers, I never answered. She sent emails I deleted without reading. 3 days after the bar, she showed up at my apartment building, but I'd already told the front desk not to let her up. Security called me. I could hear her in the background saying, "I just want to talk." I told them to inform her that all her belongings were already collected and we had nothing to discuss. A coworker asked me a week later why I seemed so much more relaxed. I realized it was because I wasn't being monitored anymore. Wasn't second-guessing every word I said or every decision I made. Wasn't living in a relationship that had turned into a surveillance state. I started going to the gym again. Reconnected with friends I'd been neglecting. Picked up a project car I'd wanted to work on. I just generally remembered what it felt like to exist without someone documenting my every move for an audience of critics. About 2 months after the breakup, a friend sent me a link to a podcast episode titled "When You're the Red Flag." I knew immediately it was about me, even without them using my name. I listened to the whole thing. It was surreal hearing Olivia describe our relationship as this oppressive situation, where I'd controlled her schedule, isolated her from friends, and made her question her own reality. None of which had actually happened. They painted me as this master manipulator, so subtle that even I didn't know I was doing it. The comment section was full of people praising Olivia for escaping, calling me every name you can imagine. The thing that bothered me wasn't the lies exactly. It was how many people believed them without question. How ready everyone was to accept that any relationship that ended must have been toxic. And any man who seemed calm must have been hiding something sinister. But here's what they didn't expect. The episode blew up, bigger than their usual content. And suddenly, people who actually knew me started recognizing the story. My company's HR even reached out after someone sent them the episode, asking if they were aware their employee was being accused of manipulation on a podcast. I had to explain the whole situation, with the screenshots of that group chat I'd saved. Former coworkers, mutual friends, even Olivia's own cousin reached out privately to say they knew the podcast version didn't match reality. Slowly, this counter-narrative started building in the comments, where people pointed out that every example she gave was either completely normal behavior or didn't actually show what she claimed it showed. The podcast's reputation started taking hits. People went back through old episodes, realizing almost every story followed the same pattern of turning regular relationship dynamics into manipulation narratives. Advertisers started quietly pulling out. I didn't participate in any of it. Didn't defend myself publicly or add fuel to the fire. I just let the truth speak for itself while I focused on actually living my life. 6 months after everything imploded, I got an email from Olivia. No subject line, just a message that said, "You weren't toxic. I'm sorry I let them convince me you were." I stared at it for a long time before closing it without responding. What was there to say? Sorry doesn't undo months of violation and betrayal. Doesn't erase the fact that she chose strangers' opinions over her own experience. Doesn't change that she was willing to destroy me to fit into a community that required everyone to have a villain origin story. I'm dating someone new now, a software engineer I met through friends. She thinks the whole podcast cult thing is insane, and she actually communicates like a real person instead of reading from a script. We have normal disagreements where we talk through problems instead of cataloging them as evidence. When she tells her friends about me, it's because she wants to share her life, not because she needs them to validate her reality. I learned that when someone turns you into a character in their narrative instead of treating you like a real person, the only move is to walk off their stage and let them perform for an empty room. The podcast eventually got cancelled after multiple sponsors dropped them, and Samantha posted some non-apology about learning and growing. I heard through mutual friends that Olivia left the production company and moved to a different city for a fresh start. I don't hate her. I don't spend time thinking about revenge. Honestly, she gave me the greatest gift, which was showing me exactly who not to waste my time on. Now, I'm just focused on building a life with someone who sees partnership as collaboration instead of content creation. What would you have done in my situation?